I'll be talking about here mostly, but I've also included a few other languages that I expect will come up in talks later in the conference. And that's just so you have some idea of how these languages are related to each other, internal to the subgroup of Tibeto Burman that I'm talking about. And also, there is a map on the handout which shows you the approximate location of these groupings, and they're fairly intuitively named at this point. So northwestern, northeastern, southwestern, southeastern, that's approximately where the different subgroups of South Central are located, and Central in the middle of them. So I'll try to remember to use terms like Western, Northeastern, and so forth to describe the languages as I'm talking about them, so that you can retain in your mind this approximate geographic location for them. So a couple things I'm going to talk about. So first of all, prefixal causatives. So there are in Southwestern languages like Kumi, prefixal causatives which have the form either P or M. So some languages have P, some languages have M, but they're pretty clearly related to each other. In Southwestern languages like Kumi, there are also T causatives, which will be something mentioned, and other places they don't have T causatives. Another kind of causative, which presumably is etymologically prefixal, is what I call mutation causatives. So mutation causatives are like the ones that you see here for Lai and Kyo. So for instance, the Kyo word krok, which means fall, and the causative of it, krok, involving aspiration of the initial, or it's actually probably phonetically more deloosing of the R in that initial cluster. But these mutation causatives, so they are widely taken to reflect the Proto-Tibeto Burman S causative prefix. So it's a well-established morphological feature in Tibeto Burman languages. So Jacques, in a 2019 Seals article on label causatives in Trans-Himalayan, examined these, especially bilabial prefixal causatives that I'm talking about. And his overall agenda was to propose that these were shared retentions from some higher level in Tibeto Burman, possibly even Proto-Tibeto Burman proper. And there are a couple of things that he claimed that I more or less agree with that I want to point out just briefly. So why P rather than M? So I mentioned there's an MP alternation. I'm not particularly committed to either one of these. I think that it doesn't really make any difference for when I'm going to talk about whether it was a P or an M positive, but probably it was a P positive. So Jacques had some South Central internal arguments for it, which may or may not make perfect sense, but anyway, we don't need to go into the details of them. But for me, P is probably a more likely form of this prefix because of the possible grammaticalization sources for it, especially the to give. And another thing, another point that Jacques made, which I want to point out, or want to say that I'm fully in support of, is that it's entirely plausible that languages may have multiple causatives from different sources, including multiple prefixal ones. So all the languages I'm going to talk about today, the prefixal causatives that they exhibit, those are more or less, they may be fairly high frequency, but they're nevertheless unproductive constructions in the languages that have them. And they, alongside them, almost always have suffixal morphological causative, which is productive. They might also have additional prefixal ones, which are unrelated to the ones that I'm talking about today. So they can have more than one of these at any one time. Now, in my paper last year at Seals in Chiang Mai, I took on Jacques' use of Mru in this overall P retention from some higher level claim. My basic point was that Mru can't be a part of this cluster of languages that maybe shares this as an innovation, because it's a very recent innovation in Mru. This year, I'm responding to a different aspect of Jacques' paper. So I'm going to provide, I'll call it admittedly weak arguments against Jacques' suggestion that T causatives in Southwestern South Central reflect the well-known Tibeto Burman S causative prefix. And I'm going to go further to suggest that the source of the mutation causatives might not be the S prefix anyway. The bilabial causatives, which are almost mutually exclusive with mutation causatives, provide what appears to be an equally feasible source for these mutation causatives. So the prefixal bilabial causatives, I'm going to move a little bit quickly through these. I won't go through these lists in any detail. So much of the data in this talk comes from a paper that was published earlier this year, So Hartman and PETERSON, which is based on a 2013 manuscript that So Hartman wrote, and unfortunately it wasn't published before she passed away. But I significantly augmented that with additional data and updated data, and it was published earlier this year. So lots of the data here comes from that article. And so, for instance, in Kumi, you see that there are P causatives. So looking at 4H, you see Shaw is long, and Shaw is to lengthen something. Very straightforward use of it here. It's actually more complicated than this. I have a 2013 article where I looked at this in more detail in Kumi. There are other patterns whereby the intransitive member or the left-hand member actually involves a middle prefix, and alongside the right-hand member involves a causative prefix. There are cases where the left-hand member of the pair is basically the positive version, but it's got a middle prefix applied to it. So there are various other patterns besides this one. The basic point is simply that there's this P causative prefix. Regnicha has an M causative prefix to also southwestern like Kumi language. The data there gives you some full sentence examples, which I don't have a lot of in this talk, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to look at it in any detail. Lemi, or Lemmy, as Helga always pronounced it, and Morkami exhibit comparable bilabial prefixal causative elements in M in those languages. So the southeastern languages like Dai, Ko, and Matu have M and P causatives as well. And I'm going to pass over these for the moment because we'll look at them in more detail towards the end of the talk. Moraic languages, so again, this group, which is probably joined with Central, Core Central and Central, Moraic has good attestation of the P causative prefix. So Zope, Samson Levin providing with this list of all of the P causatives that he's seen in his work with the language. There is, so that's in example 6. There is rich evidence for the P causative in Mara proper. And in other Moraic languages, so far there's not any clear evidence for it. So Sentun and Zotun, also Mutu, work that the Indiana University group has been working extensively with. They've turned up many P causatives, but it's nevertheless there. Okay, so in the Northwestern languages, so formerly known as Kuki, there is also good attestation of either P or M causatives. So in Mokan, there's a list there, which is not an exhaustive list probably, but it's exhaustive list. Compiled at the moment. Again, you see the forms on the left don't have a P, and they're generally intransitive. The forms on the right P vowel causative prefix, and they are transitive. Otherwise, in Northwestern languages, is a widespread M vowel or M vowel N causative. I won't go into the details of that, but lots of languages have it. So that's including MP causatives. I mentioned at the very beginning that in Southwestern languages, there are also T causative variants. So in H, there are a number of forms there from P. And you'll notice that most of those forms involve bilabial initial roots. So there are about 22 pairs of this sort that I'm aware of in Kumi, and almost all of them have P or M or P or Asper P at the beginning of them. So the only exception is that there are 4 out of these 22 which involve either an H initial root that the P is getting, sorry, the T is getting attached to, or they involve vowel initial root. So you could almost say that this is an allomorphic relationship that the T has with the P, but not quite. There are just this handful of words that make it impossible to say that. And in my 2013 paper, I actually suggested that maybe these have a different etymological source from the P causatives, but I didn't go to the extent of trying to explain what was wrong. So let's see, Lemmy and Rokimi have T causative elements as well, with a similar looking distribution to the ones that we see in Kumi. So that's exclusively the southwestern languages. Now, want to turn to mutation causatives, as I call them, which you'll remember I said are usually attributed to the S causative prefix in Tibeto Burman. So the best attestations of these are in Lai, Hakalai, and in Hyo. So just looking at the Hakalai examples here, you can see that what mutation causative involves is either aspiration of the snub or devoicing of an initial sonorant, right? So nasals, liquids in Lai. So it's just like a couple of them, D to be scared and Chi to frighten. So that's 9E. And taking one of the sonorants, 9N, mint to go out, meaning to not be lit, and mint to extinguish, right? So to make something go out, a light or a candle or whatever. So again, in 10, Hyo, so Lai is a central language, and just so you have some idea of where this mutation caused this found. Hyo is a southeastern language, and it also has a very robust attestation of them, and this there due to it's a current work with the language. We'll go through all of them. One additional thing that Hyo has, though, is it's got devoicing of vowels. Careful when I push here. Devoicing of a liquid, right? So, sorry, an initial glide, right? So, J devoices. Now, in the northeastern languages, there is also some attestation of the mutation causative, but it's far less robust than we see in southeastern language Hyo. The central languages like Lai. So just a few forms there from Henderson's word list, although it wasn't a full dictionary. So if there's a speaker of TEDM around at the conference, you will fill me in on any further forms that we could add to this list. There is extremely marginal evidence from Morayic, so in the language second time. So there's maybe 2 forms that Nguyen Parr cites in her thesis. Now, Jacques' suggestion is that the southwestern T causatives reflect the Proto-Tibeto Burman S causative prefix. So S would normally develop into an aspirate T in South Central. And so Jacques has an explanation for them, which I think makes good sense. So Jacques hypothesizes that it was deaspirated in this context due to a dispreference for aspirate minor syllables, which is what this S turning into a T would have turned into. Krista Hare, in her dissertation thesis on Lemmy minor syllables, notes that in Lemmy there's no aspirate T minor syllable. In Kumi, it's extremely rare. I know only a single word where there's an aspirate T minor syllable. So I think that makes good sense. Now, a couple of counter arguments, which again I admit are not as strong as I would like them to be for reasons I'll explain. So Jacques' account maybe predicts that there should be a much larger variety of initials where the T causatives occur. So if you think about languages like Lai and Hyo, where the mutation causative also would be coming from the Proto-S causative, hypothetically, they've got all sorts of initials that that can happen with, but it only occurs, or almost exclusively occurs with bilabial initials in the Southwestern languages that have these T causatives. And so the problem with this is that I've already said these are not productive causative formations anyway, and it may just be the luck of the draw that the Southwestern languages happen to retain reflexes of this with bilabial initial roots mostly, and not others, but the other languages have more retentions with a wider variety of initials. Another possible counterargument is that none of the known Southwestern roots which take the T causative correspond to any known hypothetical S causative roots that are seen outside of Southwestern. So again, this may just be chance, that they just don't happen to retain these. And actually, if you look carefully at the roots that are involved, or either things which have the PM causatives or which have the mutation causative, you don't see a lot of overlap between them. So it's hard to find good instances where the same root is developed any of these causatives in any two languages. Now I want to return to the Southeastern languages that I skipped over. So Dai, Matu, and Ko, and point out some differences in these languages, which I think are important. So I'll actually skip over Dai in the interest of time, because it shows almost the same thing that Ko shows. Ko shows an additional possibility. There's one slight difference between Dai and the Ko data. So ask me about it during the questions if we have time. So in Ko, you have either forms where there's M causative prefix, like in 13A through H. So again, left form like C, Dai, 13E. Doesn't have the M on the form on the right. To kill has the M prefix. You also have instances where you've got an M causative prefix plus something that looks like mutation, and it's kind of restricted in the case of Ko. So it's mostly with L initial roots. In Dai, there's a little bit more variation with some nasals, and also at least one instance of a stop being aspirated showing up. Then you also have a few instances where you just have mutation causatives in Ko. So it's very rare. These are the only forms that I know of that occurs in. But you have all three of those possibilities in Ko, and Dai is similar. It just doesn't have. Actually, it may have. I need to double check on that. It may have one or two instances where there's just a mutation causative. Now, the last thing I'm going to look at is Matu. Another Southeastern language, it's got a P causative, and in Matu, you have instances where you just have the P causative without any mutation-like effect, but there are some instances in which you do have a mutation-like effect. So, for instance, in 14 here, fall versus drop. So fall is da, and the uninflected stem in 14b would be b'tlak. Which shows th occurring in the causative context as the initial there. And that's just the normal development of th in Matu. Matu doesn't have th anymore, it's changed them all to th. So th is the devoiced version of th, the T out of affricate. Thank you. The last one is a very fun word. To be afraid of something, in 14c, there is the word is pronounced he with a voiced velar uvular fricative, so he. And when you put the P causative prefix on it, it devoices it to he, right? So he, the ghost scared, frightened me. So there's a table here in number 15, which shows you where the PM causative occurs, where the mutation causative occurs, and we cut to the chase. Except for Southeastern, where we see both languages like Kyo, which have just the mutation causative, and we see these other languages that we're just talking about, where you've got kind of mix of the different possibilities. They're kind of mutually exclusive, right? So you've either got the PM causative or you've got mutation causatives. And so what I would like to suggest is that since we see that the prefixal bilingual causative may have effects comparable to what is seen with mutation causatives, and prefixal bilingual causatives and mutation causatives have virtually mutually exclusive distributions, might or might not the mutation causatives simply be due to earlier prefixal bilabial causatives rather than the S causative. So that's my suggestion here. And that maybe has consequences for the areas for future inquiry that I mentioned here, and I'm out of time, so I can't go through these in great detail, but I'll mention two of them, and then I'll stop. So if the mutation causative phenomenon can be explained by earlier prefixal bilabial causatives, is there any incontrovertible evidence for the S causative in South Central? The short answer is maybe these T causatives are actually that still. The second bullet here puts out a request that anybody who's working with languages that have relevant phenomena in South Central, or anybody who may work with languages in South Central, please look into this. It requires a lot of very careful lexical work because, as I said, these aren't productive. In most cases, they show a lot of ability. And I want to mention lastly one possibility that occurs to me for maybe saving the S causative account of mutation causatives. And so this is not something that I'm going to say is definitely the answer, but it's something I'm still considering at this point. So is analogical formation a viable alternative explanation for the combined labial causative mutation that we see in languages like Matu, Ko, and Dai? So what I have in mind here is maybe you had some forms which had the mutation causative in them, but at the same time, the language also had one of the labial causatives, the P or the M causative, and so then maybe that labial was extended to the causative context by analogy. So that might save the S causative account of things. And so hopefully I haven't lost all of you hopelessly. So thank you. That's it.